Good morning, Court Street. My name is Mark. I'm the youth pastor here. It's been a joy to kind of gather back together and worship. One of the things that we're really excited for here as a staff and also as a church is that there is a UGM fun run happening July 17th. One of the cool things we got to participate in as a staff is a couple weeks ago, we got a tour of the new facility. One of the things that the tour guide kept saying is that it restores dignity to those who are entering the doors. And that's one of the things that got us really excited just to be able to see and to be a part of. And one of the things I wanted to pass on to you is if you've helped financially or contributed to this church, just know that you've also contributed to the UGM. Or if you've helped directly, if you pass that brand new, beautiful building, you've gotten to participate in that structure. And so this fun run happening July 17th. Afterwards, there's a ribbon cutting ceremony. So come out to that. You can walk, you can run, you can crawl, you can roll, you can do whatever you want. Just come on out and participate. Let's worship together.
Walking the wayside, lost on a lonely road. I was chasing the highlight, trying to satisfy my soul. All the lies I believed in left me crying like the rain. I saw lightning from heaven, and I've never been the same. I'm gonna climb a mountain, I'm gonna shout about it. I am a child of love. I found a world of freedom, I found a friend in Jesus. I am a child of love. Felt the sting of the fire, but I saw you in the flame. Just when I thought it was over, oh, you broke me out of that grave. I'm gonna climb a mountain, I'm gonna shout about it. I am a child of love. I found a world of freedom, I found a friend in Jesus. I am a child of love. Yeah. Oh, I am a child of love. Yeah. Oh, I am a child of love. Nothing can change the way you love me. Nothing can change the way I belong to you. Yes, I do. Nothing can separate. Nothing can change the way you love me. Nothing can change the way. Oh, I belong to you. Yes, I do. Nothing can separate. I'm gonna climb a mountain. I am a child of love, yo, yes. I'm gonna climb a mountain, 'cause I am a child of love. Child of love. I found a world of freedom, I found a friend in Jesus. I am a child of love. Yeah. Oh, I am a child of love.
known you as a friend, and I have lived in the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful, and all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. 'Cause your goodness, come on. Your goodness is running out, it's running out to me. Your goodness is running out, it's running out to me. My life laid down, I surrender now, I give you everything. Your goodness is running out, it's running out to me. Singing out your goodness. Your goodness is running out, it's running out to me, Jesus. Your goodness is running out, it's running out to me. With my life laid down, I surrender now, I give you everything. Your goodness is running out, it's running out to me. Oh, and all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. Every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. And I will sing of the goodness of God.
Hello, church. It is a pleasure to be with you today. I'm Danny Daly, and I have a special guest with me, and I get to introduce to you Tristen Collins. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, good. Yes. We are taking a break from our sermon series that is called Imagine If. It's been about Jesus's parables. And we're actually kind of going to do a revisit of a series that we did last fall. In fall of 2020, we did this sermon series called A More Vibrant Life. And it was actually inspired from a book that you wrote. And so it was about emotions. But before we get into some of that, I have a picture of your family. And so you are the author of a book. You are a therapist, you're a life coach, and these are the wonderful people of your life and your home. Could you introduce us to them?
Well, right here is John, my husband, and some of you might recognize him from Bible Project. He's one of the co-founders. And I have in the middle is Sayer. He's our youngest. He's 7, and Paxton is our oldest, and he's 10. And this is at the iconic Cannon Beach. And yeah, this is a great memory. So
Just some of the fun things that we get to do living in Oregon. Because
Yes.
you're from Portland.
actually,
you're-
originally I'm from California.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I
How's
grew up
Oregon treating you?
I have gotten used to it, that's for sure. Now super hot weather feels intense. But
Yes.
yeah, but I think there'll always be a Californian inside of me that needs sun in the like long days of winter, but
Yes.
I think even natives have that issue too.
Yeah, February is a very gray month for me.
Yes.
So yes,
Yes.
I love the sunshine. What do you like to do for fun with your family?
Well, lately, this is kind of funny, but John built a sauna. And so it's a small little box in our tiny backyard. And we love just going and getting as hot as possible. And then he got a like feeding trough for one of those animals and
Yeah.
fills it with cold water and has like it at very cold temperature. And so my boys love the challenge to see how long they can stay in the cold water. But yeah,
I bet that'll be really nice this week when it's hot outside. You can
I
be
know,
like, this
we're
is
already
our
used to it.
refuge. We can have the cold water.
That's true. The cold water for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. The temp inside is 180, so we've gotten
Ooh.
used to some heat.
That's really fun though, and I love
Yeah.
that your boys are excited for that like tough challenge. Like how much can I handle?
Yes,
Oh,
it's
that
been
is
fun. So.
Well, let's show off this book that you and John wrote together. This is called Why Emotions Matter: Recognizing Your Body Signals, Growing in Emotional Intelligence. And I love this phrase, discover an embodied spirituality. This isn't just about psychology. This is something that is an integral part of our walk with God. And as we got to explore the content that you guys had written in this book as a pastoral team and then bring that to the church in our sermon series, we just had such a delight and an appreciation for how you guys articulated that emotions are God's gift to us and that they can bring such joy and vibrancy to life because like God's using that to help us understand ourselves. And how do we interpret them well and use that for good? So that is one of the things that we really appreciate. And so church, actually the great thing is we are going to have this book on sale this weekend. And so they're $10 in the lobby. If you haven't read it before, it is a fabulous resource. My own personal copy got passed around to a lot of family members and got marked up and kind of a little bit tattered, but it brought about such good conversations. And so I do recommend you reading this. If you need a copy, you can always, and you're watching from home, you can always email me at ddaly@courtstreet.org, and we'd love to help you get a copy of that.
Thank you. Yes.
yeah.
I also want to mention Melissa Binder. She was the one who actually made this into a book because originally I had the vision that this would be a workbook for support groups and for churches. And she was able to take, all of the information that we gathered and make it into a more accessible book. So we're really thankful for her.
Well, and it's so interesting that this was originally envisioned to be a workbook or something practical for churches, and that's why we found it so applicable to then bring it to our church in the form of a sermon series. Yeah. Oh, it was so good. So the thing today, church, is that we're actually not going to focus on this book. We've got some more great content that we want to keep building this conversation because part of the vision for our church is that we would be a training facility for life, that we would learn how to keep loving God and loving others, and that through that we get to be transformed in the process. And so the thing is, we are often, when we come to church, kind of inspired of yes, I want to love people. I want to love people well, but I don't always know how because of what I've experienced and how I see the world. Sometimes I keep encountering obstacles. And today, we really get to lean in to saying, how do we actually love people well? What are some of the obstacles that we are butting up against in a sense? And it gets really personal too, because I think of how do you love an ex-spouse? Or how do you love that coworker who said such hurtful things and you still have to see them every day when you go to work? Or what about that sibling that just doesn't quite understand you and it gets to just be really discouraging and you kind of are I don't know what to do. It's overwhelming. Sometimes you end up wanting to avoid somebody because in our relationships, we get to this place that feels stuck. And so when we think as a church that we are so excited to keep loving God and loving others really well, there's this invitation for us personally that we get to do some things that's going to exercise new skills and understandings so that we can relate to ourselves in a healthy way and that then we can relate to others. We can have some compassion for maybe deciphering or understanding what might be going on in a situation, and that would actually help us lean in to saying, oh, we can actually take action in a way that is going to bring God's kingdom, God's beauty, God's love into the world. And so oftentimes here at Court Street, we spend a lot of time like building sermons and examining scripture and doing so many great studies. But at the same time, we're going to just take a little pause today and go into this training facility for life, because this is so valuable and it really does have the power to transform. So with that, sorry, Tristen, we can get into what we were talking about. But Tristen,
so great to hear your vision.
Thank you. It's really personal for me, because when I was a teenager, it was actually that my mom and dad and my family, we kind of went through one of those times where there's a medical crisis that leads to a financial crisis. And then all of a sudden in my parents' marriage, they're like, something's not working. We've been through so much stress and trauma that how do we relate to each other? So this is really personal for me, because I feel like I got to watch a beautiful love story unfold as my parents explored skills like this and practiced personally and with each other. And 20 years later, it's like, it just is so touching to see that they are able to love each other in a really intimate, dear way, because when we do this kind of work on ourselves, it really can transform our lives. So
Definitely.
yeah.
Definitely.
Thank you for
that.
letting me share some of that heart-to-heart stuff. Are you ready to jump in?
I'm ready.
Let's go for it. Would you be willing to share with us, like, what are some things that we just want to review from your book that are going to help us move the conversation forward?
Well, definitely. One of the metaphors that we use in our book is that feelings are like the dashboard of our car, and that it gives us valuable information. We might not like the information, but it's really helpful to know what's going on inside our car at any point. We can just look at the dashboard and get kind of a summary of what's happening. And feelings are very similar.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved, we've kind of been working through this definition of like, what are feelings? What are emotions? And so I have this definition here, and it says, feelings are a summary of information happening inside our bodies, and it's a response to the environment happening around us. So lots of information, and you've described in your book that it's not necessarily specific all the time. It's not like you need to refuel in 165.3 miles.
Yes, unfortunately, it doesn't tell us how many miles we are till empty.
Yes. We kind of have to do some detective work and pull over, pop open the hood sometimes and say, why is the check engine light on? Or what's going on with the oil in the engine?
Definitely. And sometimes we need help because, like me, I am not a good mechanic. And so sometimes it gets beyond my scope. And so it's really helpful to have people in your life that can, be that sounding board for you to say, there's something going on. I'm not really sure what it is. Sometimes it's just a good friend. Sometimes it's a pastor. Sometimes it's a therapist. But yes, our bodies are complicated, more complicated than a car. And but feelings are so helpful to try to understand what's going on in our very complex and wonderful bodies.
Yes. Oh, wow. And so in your book, you'd mentioned several, out of all the emotions we experience, there are like 6 examples that you guys leaned into. And some of them we often label or is it like uncomfortable, or can sort of have this connotation of being a negative emotion. However, they each have such value for the information that they're communicating to us. And so shame,
Definitely.
fear, sadness, anger, jealousy, happiness, these are ones that we really appreciated how you guys introduced these emotions to us. And church, if you haven't gone to that sermon series, I do recommend it. It's really great content. So it honestly, you helped redeem the idea of jealousy in my life.
Oh, great.
I have always been confused. What was that for? And the fact that information could tell me, oh, I have some desires or some longings, and those longings really matter. And so when I'm feeling jealousy, I don't have to take it out on another person. I can actually use that for good in my own life.
Yes,
I
definitely.
really appreciated that.
Yeah, jealousy doesn't have to become envy.
Absolutely. And it doesn't need to be something that breaks down my relationships with others. It can actually fuel my vision for what I really want
Definitely.
and the direction I want to go.
Yes. So even thinking of it as like a compass to say, oh, this is something that's direct me towards what I'm longing for. Jealousy
Yes.
can be really helpful in all these feelings.
Oh, yeah.
Ultimately, help us to navigate life.
Yes, absolutely. So Tristen, when we experience any of these emotions, what do you recommend as a starting point for exploring shame, fear, and sadness? Like, where do we even start as we are trying to glean information?
Yes. Well, I definitely see a helpful question to ask yourself is, what is this emotion trying to communicate to me?
Yeah.
And that's just a great starting off point of, this is coming up on my dashboard. Why is it here?
I think that one of the things I appreciate is that you've said that often emotions are linked to a need that we might have. And it's really easy to think about that with toddlers or something. When you're leading kids, you're like, oh, they want this lollipop. They have a need for something sweet and that gratification. And when they have that need met, their face lights up, they're loving the sugar, they're having a blast. Or as adults in their lives, when we have to decline that need and say, actually, let's wait till after dinner. And then all of a sudden, it can be, you see a lot of other emotions erupting.
Yes, toddlers definitely get confused about their needs. So they might think, I need a lollipop, but really they need to eat food. And
Yes.
so, yes, I think, adults are similar. We often don't know what we need, but feelings are there to communicate, unmet needs.
Yeah. So we might be feeling anger or frustration or something. And there's instead of just saying, oh, this is bad, I'm not supposed to feel that, we get to decipher what's underneath it. What do I need right now? What is this pointing me to?
Definitely. Yes. So like the toddler, the anger could be that your desire is being thwarted, or it could be that you're hungry.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that it depends on the circumstance. So the wonderful thing about our complex human bodies and our human experience is that we're not just emotional beings, we're also like thinking beings. And part of today, we want to turn the conversation into saying, how do our thoughts interact with our emotions? How do we work these things together? Would you mind sharing a little bit about how thoughts and emotions kind of intersect inside of us?
Well, I think that with thoughts and emotions that oftentimes they get confused. And so when people are frustrated with emotions, oftentimes they're really frustrated with a particular thought. And so I thought it'd be helpful for us to kind of try to decipher what is a thought and what is a feeling.
Yes, you gave some great examples. So I've got some examples of statements up here that says, I feel that you don't love me, or I feel like a failure, or I feel like my boss is being manipulative. And what I thought was really profound is that even though these are I feel statements, you actually said these are thoughts.
Yes, these are all thoughts. And one clue that it's not really a feeling is using words like that. I feel that you don't love me, or I feel that you rejected me this morning. And then also the word like is another clue. And so one of the reasons why we gave 6 feelings is to just, even though there's so many feelings that you can choose from, it just helps to start with 6 so you can get more clarity on what's actually a feeling and what's a thought.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've got a whole spectrum of feelings. And so where do we start? That was a really helpful starting spot. So let's just like lean into this and define what thoughts really are, because these are conclusions and these are sort of like these are almost like statements of how we're deciphering and how we're perceiving the world. And so let's just define thoughts right now. It's that we were discussing that thoughts are a lot of cognition and our prefrontal cortex and all sorts of things. But generally, thoughts are my interpretations and judgments. And so they're the conclusions we land on. They're the perceptions that we have oftentimes. And I really like this picture that we've kind of created to say that thoughts and feelings are really connected. They are not just
definitely.
isolated from each other, that we're receiving information in our feelings of what's happening in our body, what's happening in our environment, and then our thoughts are forming as we're trying to process that. So if our thoughts and our feelings are interconnected, then I have a kind of a funny example actually. Many times when I am really experiencing a lot of hunger in my life, then people call it hangry, but I sometimes get hungry sad too, and my body just kind of goes, meow. And it changes my thought pattern too, because I become a little bit more despairing, I am more tired, and I have a little bit more negative thoughts. But then when somebody like my loving husband will be like, here's a sandwich, then all of a sudden the feelings that I have because my body has some needs that are being met, that changes what my emotions and my experiences are. And suddenly the world is a much more hopeful place. It's a little bit rosy and brighter. So
Definitely. And I think, I think I'm most vulnerable to negative thoughts when I'm sick or tired. I don't know if any of you have noticed, but when we're sick and we have a fever laying in bed, it's often the times that we have the most negative thoughts that come in because we're already in a state of, being really drained and just depleted.
well, and you had a beautiful statement, a really profound statement that you shared with our teaching team, and it's that painful thoughts can actually increase painful feelings. I gave an example starting with feelings first, but that thoughts can really start the train of what we're experiencing in our bodies. Can you give an example of some painful thoughts that you find we naturally are inclined to, and how does that end up affecting us?
Yes. So in the psychological world, there's a saying that all or nothing thinking is a way of increasing painful thoughts. And so an example would be, she never listens to me, or he always does this, or things like I'm lazy or they're mean. They're very black and white statements. And so those type of thoughts tend to increase negative feelings. And so it's really important to just be aware of those type of thoughts and hold them loosely and get more curious about it.
Yeah, you had a great example of, do you mind walking us through this idea of when a friend doesn't respond to your texts? What were some of the thoughts that we sometimes come to that are all or nothing thinking?
Yes. So our thoughts are very quick. And so our automatic thought, let's say that, a friend didn't respond to your text, and your automatic thought would be, they don't like me, or they are inconsiderate. And so when you think about those thoughts, how does it make you feel when you think that thought?
Mm-hmm.
And then taking time to think, how would you behave when you're thinking the thought, they don't like me, or they're so inconsiderate? Those thoughts affect our feelings, and it affects the way that we behave, our actions.
Yeah, and then you sort of you painted a picture of what an alternative could be, that we don't have to simply jump to these conclusions when we experience something like a non-response to our texts. Another thought that we could have that would change our experience or feelings would be, they didn't respond and I don't know why. That's a really true statement, and it does seem to encapsulate somebody's experience, but it would put us on a different trajectory for our feelings and then our behavior. Because to me, that's the kind of thing that would invite me to lean in. Say, oh, I don't know why. Well, I love this person. I care about them. Are they having a rough day? That's a whole different kind of train. So let's do another example. Sound
Great.
good?
Sounds great.
So having a conflict with your partner, the statement that you came up with, that people, do you hear this a lot in sort of relationships and therapy?
Oh, definitely. I mean, as a pastor, have you also heard this as well?
Absolutely.
When you get into a conflict with your partner, it's just easy to think the thought, we'll never understand each other. And so when you think that thought, I just want you to imagine how that would affect your feelings. What would you feel when you think the thought, we will never understand each other? and then how that would affect your behavior. What do you do when you think the thought, my husband will never understand me, or my wife will never understand me? It's really helpful to just identify that that's a thought.
Yeah, and that it's like that would make me feel a lot more hopeless or like less motivated to try because you're like, well, they're never going to do anything. So it's never going to change.
Yes.
And why should I even put in the effort? And so
Exactly.
you had another great example of how we can reframe our thoughts in that moment of saying, I don't know what my partner wants or what they need. And that to me is one of those, again, like it would really change my response because all of a sudden I'm reminded that I love my partner. I care about their needs. I care about their wants. And what can I do about it?
Yes. And it's kind of like going back to the metaphor about the dashboard. You might be reading, what your partner is communicating about their dashboard, but you might need some help because both of you don't know what to do with that information that you're getting and how to
Yes.
navigate that. Yeah, and that's okay.
Yeah, this is just part of our human experience. And I feel like sometimes those crossed wires or our natural inclination towards all or nothing thinking is not something to be ashamed of or embarrassed about. But really, we get to be in the driver's seat. Just like we're in the driver's seat for our emotions, they don't have to be dictating how we react. Also, with our thoughts, we have some influence about how we're going to shape this relationship or this narrative.
Yes.
So, would you be willing to share? Like, we're so inclined towards this all or nothing thinking. Why are we so quick to fill in the blanks?
Yes. Well, I think all of us know that humans don't like uncertainty, as we've seen with this pandemic, creating a lot of uncertainty. And that, one of the things that in the psychological world, they talk about that humans are natural story makers.
Yeah.
And so when we don't know what's happening, we tend to fill in the blanks with a story.
This is
And-
something that we wrote down when we were talking to you on the phone that I was like, oh, this is so good. Of course we have to share this with the church because
Yes.
it's true. Yeah, that's what we do.
Yes, we try to make meaning out of what's happening in our lives. And so the researcher, Brene Brown, she's a researcher about shame. She talks about how it's really helpful to have this saying, the story I'm telling myself is. And so it's really taking that automatic thought that you might have and reframing it in the sense of, this is the story I heard or I'm thinking, but it might not be true. And so just framing it in the sense of, this is a story I'm telling myself, kind of puts it in a place of curiosity rather than certainty.
Yes, I would say when we were listening to what you were teaching us as a pastoral team and as a teaching team, we were thinking about the fact that your invitation is really this idea of going to a place of curiosity with our thoughts instead of just jumping into the conclusions. Sometimes we can be really quick to do that. And how do we pause to have sort of an open hand in exploring them? What do you feel like that exploration process does to a person? How does that shape our thinking?
I think part of when you're in a place of curiosity, it puts you into more of a place of humility instead of a place of, being more combative.
Yes.
And so, just thinking in terms of when you relate to someone in a place of humble curiosity, that would be much more different than coming to a place of, I know exactly what happened and I'm going to make you see it the way that I see it.
Yeah.
It's very different places to come from.
Yeah, as we listened to your teaching, we thought of these statements that I feel like are great invitations for us as a church, as a community to embody. And it's this idea of let's be humble enough to question our own thoughts. That's the open-handed curiosity to say, I'm going to be able to recognize my thoughts just like I recognize my emotions, but I don't have to suddenly react to them. I can also explore them and figure out, how did I get there? Or maybe I have some assumptions that are embedded in this situation, or maybe my past experience with a person is influencing what I'm expecting them to do next. I even think of this as like it can be involved with like our prejudices or something like that. Like, oh, I'm perceiving this part of a person's story or experience, and I'm going to write this narrative in response.
Definitely. It's a human response to make prejudgments.
Yeah.
And so I think part of is just normalizing that we are going to jump to conclusions. We are going to make up a story. But then the difference between someone who's more emotionally agile, is a term, is someone who questions their thoughts and says, maybe that prejudgment that I had might not be correct.
Yeah, and I like that it can lead to action because all of a sudden we can be brave enough to ask for clarification. And that's a very relational thing. Like the humility to question our thoughts is an internal reflective type thing, but it can lead to action that connects us to a person. And that's going to then change our internal, we're going to get more information from relating in that way. Yeah, so I love these two questions. Be humble enough to question your own thoughts. Be brave enough to ask for clarification. But there is this idea of like, we want to be humble. We want to question our own thoughts. We don't want to get stuck always questioning ourselves. You've mentioned that before in our conversations as well. Like, it's not that we have to question our thoughts and doubt ourselves. It's that we want to use this to move forward in a really healthy way. So what's a practical step that somebody could take home or take to their journal today that they could start questioning their thoughts in a way that would be constructive?
There's this process called the work, and it's developed by this woman. Her name is Byron Katie, and it's a wonderful process to think of it as a meditative process and to get curious about your thoughts. And so there isn't any right or wrong way to answer these questions, but it's really about trying to self-reflect. And so let's say, a lot of social media creates painful thoughts. And so an example that might be, one of your relatives, they post something on social media and your response is, what they posted was politically charged and you completely disagree with them. And so your automatic thought might be, my Uncle Phil is a horrible person. And that's your automatic thought. That's a story you're telling yourself. And so the work is starting to come to that place of saying, this is the thought that I'm having. And asking yourself first, is it true? Is Uncle Phil, and this is just yes or no, is Uncle Phil a horrible person? And maybe you're so upset, you might say, yes, it's true. So you go to the next question. Can I absolutely know that it's true? And this is where you might start to say, well, maybe not. Maybe he's not always horrible. Now, this is where number 3, how do I react when I believe that thought? Uncle Phil is a horrible person. And that's where even trying to get in tune with how does that thought affect your body and the way that you relate to others? And so when I start thinking about, my relative being a horrible person, I get really agitated, my neck is tight, my shoulders are tense. Maybe you're walking around the rest of the day just being really irritable and short with everyone you encounter. And maybe you're thinking the whole day, you're distracted of how am I going to respond with my, quick and witty comments that's going to cut them down and let them know, what I really think. And so just noticing that that's how you're responding when you think that thought. And then number 4 is, what would you be without the thought? And just imagining if I didn't have the thought, my Uncle Phil or relative is a horrible person, I would feel a lot more peaceful. And just realizing how that affects your body and how that affects your relationships. And so the work is a great way to start to just look at your thought from different perspectives. Mm-hmm. And the final step is really important because this is taking that thought and it's turning it to the opposite. Yeah. So, your painful thought is Uncle Phil is a horrible person. And so you're just changing the verb to Uncle Phil isn't a horrible person. And consider 3 reasons that could be true. And when I think about my relative, I think, okay, this relative, actually, when I see them in real life, they're very kind to me. And when I think about the relationships with, people around them, they're very warm and friendly. And And then just even thinking about how they do contribute to their community. And so this process is just a great way to sort of loosen some of that certainty that we can feel about, painful thoughts and how it really can escalate those negative feelings in our body. And it may or may not be helpful. And so the work is a great way to kind of explore, is this thought helping me, or is this thought actually increasing unnecessary pain for me and my relationships?
Absolutely. Wow. And I think of how powerful this could be, like in a marriage where you're like, oh man, we've lived together and we're trying to figure out how to relate, and we keep coming against this block. And I've developed these perceptions of my spouse. And this final step, to me, I've never heard of something like this. And I thought it was really insightful that you can suddenly turn it around, and it's almost like practicing giving somebody the benefit of the doubt.
Definitely.
Or like practicing saying, I need to define what I don't know and invite them to help me fill in those gaps so that we can start relating in a way that's not built on my assumptions or things like that. Yeah.
Definitely.
Wow. I think that this is a really powerful thing. And I hope that church, maybe this will be something that inspires you to journal this week. Maybe it'll be part of your prayer life. I don't know what sort of relationship or situation you might be in where you feel a tension or you feel like you don't know how to make things better. And this is a cool way to start exploring those thoughts and your personal experiences of it so that it can come out in our actions and our behaviors towards others in a more loving and gracious way. I really love this. You mentioned this verse that as we were talking, it's Philippians 4:8. And it's Paul's words to the Philippian church, and it's at the end of his letter to them. And what I thought was just so interesting is Paul's been giving these instructions about how to live and how this church can keep operating. And this is just right at the end. He tucks it in as some like words of wisdom, an invitation to say, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, and whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And it's like he's giving us an option, like, oh my goodness, we can choose how we are going to be thinking. Sure, those automatic thoughts will come, but we do get to be in the driver's seat to say, am I going to choose to think about what's true, or am I going to just lean into my perception or my interpretation? It's a really interesting thing. Did you have anything else you wanted to add as we close out today?
Yeah, that I do think that Scripture does highlight that our thoughts are powerful.
Yeah.
And Paul in the New Testament talks about how, we need to focus on what we're thinking, and that affects our relationships, that affects, how we function in the world. Mm-hmm. And so that was my hope that today that people can just start to even just recognize when you're having a thought.
Mm-hmm.
And in that way, it actually creates a different perspective in how you're relating to that thought. And so, it's just an invitation to start that process.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing it. In some ways, I was just thinking we get to bring some of the golden nuggets that somebody might encounter in a therapy session, that we get to bring that here for free at church. Like, that's the wonderful thing about being a community, that we are working on loving each other, loving God, and that makes life better, and it also makes us better at life too. So thank you for sharing. I hope that it's the beginnings of your next book. Whatever comes next, we're cheering for you, and so grateful for how you're contributing. So church, let me just pray for you today, and then we'll bless you as you go from here. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for Tristen, and thank you for John and Melissa as they have been compiling such good wisdom and such good suggestions that in practical ways we can understand ourselves better, and that through that we can love one another even better. I pray for anybody that's in the sound of my voice that's feeling pain today, that you would just be near to them in whatever they're facing, and that I thank you that we are not alone as we experience pain or as we navigate the challenges of relationships and things like that. I pray that you would continue to be a help, and that you would help us as a church surround people to get them the help that they need. Lord, help us to be available in that. And ultimately, God, I just pray for the hope that we have in bringing your love and your kingdom into all aspects of our lives. That we would be able to use today's information to grow stronger and wiser and more loving. So in your name I pray, amen. So church, thank you so much. We'll look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.